Hi, boys and girls. It's time for us to have another Grandma Sheilla story. Our story today is called The Two Scars. Mr. Jackson and Joey, they were standing out in the clearing when all of a sudden their heads jerked around. They heard something, a big something. All the natives that were around the edge of the jungle, they all stopped right from what they were doing. And then there was a huge sound that was coming closer and closer. It sounded like the cross between a giant roar of anger and a cry of pain. Well, they didn't have long to wait when they were trying to figure out where to run to. Right across that creek and into that clearing came a huge bull elephant. He had his trunk in the air and he was trumpeting. When he got close to Mr. Jackson and little Joey, they could see his eyes looking frantically this way and that way in terror. Then Mr. Jackson saw what the trouble was. There on the thigh of that huge elephant were two arrows piercing into the flesh. No matter how that elephant shook himself, he couldn't get those arrows out. Mr. Jackson and Joey quickly knew what had to be done. Their plan suddenly was to shoo that huge elephant down a big embankment into a huge gully. Well, that elephant was so upset, or maybe it was his pain was so bad that it was like his elephant mind was muddled, and he ran like a storm down that embankment into that gully with Mr. Jackson and Joey rushing after him. When they got that elephant into the gully, they grabbed ropes that they had kept down there and they tied him up. They tied his legs. They tied him to the edges of that gully. Well, he didn't like that. He started stomping and pulling and trumpeting. But part of the plan had been Joey had said he should be the one to pull out those arrows. So Mr. Jackson stood back. He had his hunting gun with him. He thought, if this plan doesn't work and it starts to go bad, I guess I might have to shoot him. But he hoped that wasn't the case. But little Joey, he ran up behind that elephant, trying to avoid that big trunk that was flying this way and that way. You know, the trunk of an elephant is a big, strong muscle. And if it hits you, it could kill a man. That's how strong it was. But Joey, he jumped back out of the way. He got over by where he could see those arrows sticking out of the thigh of that elephant. He knew he only had a short period of time. So he got up there and he grabbed those arrows and he pulled for all his might. And he was able to get them out. Then he quickly jumped down and untied the ropes. And then he leaped as hard as he could, just like a leopard would leap, far out of the way of the stomping feet and that menacing trunk. For a second, that huge elephant looked at both little Joey and Mr. Jackson. And then, as hard as those big feet could go, he thundered out of that gully and disappeared across the creek trumpeting all the way. Phew, that was a scary experience. Well, quite a while went by, and one day, while Mr. Jackson was standing beside his house, Joey came running and he said, "Buwana, Buwana, run quick! We must fight! The terrorists are coming!" It seemed like there was no end of trouble. Everybody in the house ran to get big sticks, and the people that had guns got the guns, and they rushed out to fight these people that were going to destroy their village and their house. But those terrorists, they knew how to use their guns, and they were used to fighting. But the people from the house, they gave a great fight. And while they were still trying to fight and chase those terrorists away, once again, they heard a loud sound. But it was the sound of not one elephant, but a whole group, a whole herd of elephants were coming thundering out of the jungle with their trunks up in the air, trumpeting angrily. And they stomped across that creek, and they got over close to where that house, to where all those terrorists were fighting with the people that lived there in the village. And Mr. Jackson noticed the big bull elephant that seemed to be the leader of these elephants. He stood strong and proud, and he seemed to be moving his elephants all into a line of attack. Mr. Jackson, he thought, now not only do I have to fight terrorists, I have to fight all those elephants. I don't think I can fight elephants, a whole herd of them. He didn't know what to do. But as he stood there contemplating, trying to stay out of the way of the terrorists, those elephants made their way in a line, in a big circle, all the way around Mr. Jackson's house. They gave a mighty trumpet, and they started stomping and swinging. And Mr. Jackson noticed that those elephants were only going after the terrorists. Might of fact, those elephants pushed and stomped and hit with their trunks at those terrorists till all of them ran away into the jungle, leaving just Mr. Jackson and Joey and the villagers there. Then that big male elephant, he stood big and tall. He looked at Mr. Jackson. He looked down at Joey. And he turned around with a mighty trumpet. And he and his whole herd of elephants disappeared into the jungle. Then that big elephant, he stopped, and he turned around, and he looked back toward the Buwana and toward Joey. And Joey was a little African boy. He had been raised in the jungle. He knew the elephants. He cautiously made his way over to that big bull elephant, and very carefully he took his chocolate brown hand and he started petting that huge elephant. And that big elephant started making the sweetest sounds. He took his trunk and very gently He reached out, and time again, he touched the face of little Joey, oh so gently, with that trunk that could have killed a man. When he was done, he stood up proudly again, and Joey rushed over, and he said, "Luana," that's what they called the head man of the house. "Luana, he wants to meet you." He, the elephant? So very slowly, that big grown man walked ever so slowly over toward that big elephant. He looked up at him, and then the elephant looked down at him, and he turned to walk away. And as he was going, the Bwana understood, for there on the thigh of that big male elephant were two big scars from arrows. You know, we're told that elephants never forget a kindness. That's the way Jesus made them. And they never forget to repay a kindness either. That big elephant, he knew and remembered Joey, who had helped him. And he remembered the Bwana. And he came back when he saw that they were in trouble and defended them. Isn't our God wonderful to make the animals know how to do such wonderful things? Our God is great and mighty and wonderful. Thank you, boys and girls. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.